We'll be starting in just about 1 minute here. We still got people coming into the webinar. Well, good afternoon. My name is Gene Paranek. I'm joined by Aaron Kerrer, Adrian Harris, Rick Routson, and Steve Minus doing support, fielding your questions and other chat items that you're going to put through later. I just want to start out. We held our first webinar last Friday, and the community just came out of the woodwork. Thank you all, especially but not exclusively the companies and organizations listed on the screen in front of you. Some of them were late at night sending email blasts out so that we could convene together.
Gene, you have a window on your screen.
Thank you. So that we could convene last Friday. We had more than 200 participants. It looks like we're on our way to that today as well. So thank you all for your participation, for getting the word out. If we've missed recognizing anybody here, please please just let us know. We'd love to add you. I just found out that I'm sharing the wrong screen. We're going to try to figure that out here momentarily. All right, I'm hoping that my staff will let me know whether we've got the right screen back up now.
Looks good.
All right, sorry about that, everybody. So again, thank you to all the folks that you see here for helping us convene this. We really appreciate it. Please note, many of you asked last time, will the webinar be available? Yes, it will. It will come around to all registered participants of this webinar. We welcome your participation, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Please state only new info. Your old info from Friday will go around again, so don't feel like you have to state anything that was stated last time. State new info. Use the chat box. If you have a question you want us to answer on air, go ahead and use the Q&A. If you have something you want to get to the whole group, use the chat box, and that will make it around to everybody eventually. Also, if I tell you that you're live, please make sure you're off mute so that we can get as quickly to your information as possible. Keep it brief, your name, your company, your needs, and your efforts that you're working on. And some folks said, well, how can Into Being help? We'll just let you know that really quickly. First of all, let us know where you're stuck. If it's your intention to help relieve the equipment crisis that we're all facing, let us know where you're stuck. We can help with introductions. We can help with quick, free, get you unstuck explanations. And we can also do in-depth technical development and regulatory work because that's our day job anyway. So just reach out with anything that you need, and many of you have, and we're thankful for that. We also want to announce that every Friday now, we're going to do a COVID Connect live call-in. This format's going to be the basic format. We're going to touch on any new FDA updates. We're going to touch on any questions you may have and give chances for the community to get together and connect and tell each other about what's going on. You can register for that at intobeing.com/COVID Connect, and that should be live right now, and if not, it should be live in a few minutes. So please register. We're going to keep that going as long as the need is in place. So the agenda for today, we're going to brief you on the latest news. We're going to talk about some common emergency use authorization misconceptions. We're going to talk about common trends that you're going to find in the emergency use authorizations. Then we're going to review FDA's updated emergency use authorizations and/or guidance for decontamination, face masks, ventilators, as well as gowns and other protective equipment. Now, they've been busy even over this last weekend. Then we're going to have a community open forum like we did last time, 30-second check-ins, conveners, that's large groups making connections, hospital systems, we'd like to know your status, material suppliers, very important. If you're a material supplier, we want to hear from you. Please let us know what you can supply and how people can get hold of you. Manufacturers, we had some great interfaces last time. Please let us know what you need to keep moving along. Some of you need materials, some of you need designs, some of you need regulatory support. Let us know, and we will get that to you. Diagnostics. We're not focused primarily on diagnostics in these calls, but we're going to try to touch on that briefly at the end and give a chance for folks working on the diagnostics for COVID-19 to have a chance to get your information out there as well. So with that, the news, I want to bring up really quickly what some of you may have heard, which is the news that Medtronic is releasing the specifications, the design specifications, the drawings, the design package for their PV560 ventilator system. You can download them from Medtronic's website, and they're giving, I believe it's a 4-year non-revocable license to use it in response to COVID-19. This is a dramatic development, and we're very excited about this with some of the folks that we've got on this call, from material suppliers to folks like Roush to companies like Keystone and MedBio. I bet we could all put our heads together and think about how we can make use of this. But that's news item number 1. Medtronic has released the PB560 ventilator system design files to the public. The next one is news out of Ford. We were very excited to see this, especially the following, that Ford is going to produce Models A through E ventilators designed by Florida-based Aeron Corp. Very interesting that Ford has identified a robust design that's already FDA approved. They're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. They're just trying to support where they can, and we give them a lot of kudos for that. This article in the Detroit News. Next, new emergency use authorizations. One for Battelle Memorial for their decontamination system for N95 masks, very exciting. Updated personal protective equipment, emergency use authorizations that we'll talk about. New ones on decontamination, not only for masks, but also for rooms and other kinds of decontamination systems. And finally, guidance on gloves and gowns and the use of those. I want to turn it to Adrian Harris for just a moment to tell us about a diagnostic happening that's coming up tomorrow, I believe. Adrian?
Yes, tomorrow and repeating weekly for the next 4 weeks. There was also one last week. So this is an FDA-hosted virtual town hall directed to laboratories and manufacturers to answer technical questions about developing tests for COVID-19.
That's great. Thank you for that, Adrian. And that's really important. If you're working on the diagnostic side, we're hearing that folks are looking for collaborators. Many times those collaborators that they need are folks that they can go test their ideas out with in a almost ready to launch setting. Finally, in news, we wanted to celebrate the connections that you all made after our last meeting on Friday. We got so many emails of people saying, thank you, I made a connection that I needed to make, I wouldn't have had any other way to make it. We're so excited about that. We've heard anecdotes about materials being shipped for testing and other things like that based on your connections last time. Let's keep that up. Let's keep that going. That is so exciting to us. Let's touch on some common misperceptions about the emergency use authorizations that FDA has issued. We keep hearing these, and this week we've heard some more that have given us pause, and we want to make sure we touch on those before we dive into the details. So listen closely. The emergency use authorizations are not a free-for-all. They are reduced regulation, not the absence of regulation. Understanding that will help you immensely. They are a great help, but they're not a free-for-all. They adjust the oversight that's normally there on a topic-by-topic basis. So not all EUAs are created equal. They're not an opportunity to make big claims. We keep hearing from folks who say, I've got this great technology, and I think it would be really appropriate here. That's great, but the whole point of the EUAs is to get things out with reduced claims, to minimize the new things we're claiming. Many of them say, don't say this has anything to do with COVID-19. Just say, for example, that it's a mask. So reduce those claims no matter what, and ask us questions if you have questions on that. Another point that was made to me recently is EUAs are not a license to invent. They're a license to adapt. We will be most effective as a community if we can adapt the things that we have to the purposes that we need them for. So think adapt, not invent in this case. And I've heard from companies saying, we need to get under the EUA at any cost. That's not necessarily true. There's a lot of places where the EUA is for specific, already approved things. If you want to get in doing masks, for example, your best bet is probably to reduce your claims to say that we're a construction mask and to go out there and sell it not as a medical device. And that will probably be your fastest route to the market. So those are some common misconceptions. Ask us any questions that you may have. Some common trends in the EUAs. The first is FDA's justification. They state this in almost every document. They have planned scrutiny as to how they're going to monitor these. And there's an end game in mind. So first of all, the FDA's justification, it's that SARS-CoV-2 is life-threatening. And it's reasonable to believe in FDA's estimation that their allowances may still be effective in use. And there's no adequate alternative in many of these cases. Therefore, the potential benefit of the action outweighs the risks. Please keep this in mind. This is why and how FDA is thinking about it. They're thinking in a benefit-risk framework. They have not stopped thinking in a benefit-risk framework. Their planned scrutiny, we showed this graphic previously. Now we're using scalpels as an example, but the principle applies to everything from face masks to ventilators. Well, I shouldn't say ventilators. It applies to things like face masks and gowns. and face shields. The thing on the left is an X-Acto knife. The thing in the middle is a scalpel. The thing on the right is a cervical cone knife. The first one is not a medical device. The second one is a Class 1 medical device. The third is a Class 2 medical device. Each one of these is subject to either no scrutiny, minimal scrutiny, or great scrutiny. Which of those will cut? Well, any of them will. This is an example of how you can reduce your claims. And FDA says that they're going to be looking at the labeling claims that you make as you issue these devices to try to determine whether you're issuing them correctly or not. That's not really a great change, but it may come as a surprise to many people. Finally, the end game. These medical devices will cease to be medical devices when the FDA retracts the emergency use authorization, unless you've gone out and labeled them as medical devices, in which case you'll be subject to all the normal regulations. So consider carefully your labeling as we go through this. All right, what we're going to do next, after I do a quick check-in with the staff here to make sure we're running smoothly, is we're going to review the FDA's updated emergency use authorizations and/or guidances on the following topics, checking in with folks behind the scenes.
All good here.
Yep, keep going.
Thank you all. First of all, we're going to start with the news of Battelle's decontamination system. This is very exciting because this is the first time we've seen a decontamination system for N95 masks approved. What we're going to do here is we're not going to do a PowerPoint on it. We're going to take you right to the document that FDA has issued with some highlighted sections. Our hope here, thanks to Rick Routson's suggestion, is we're hoping that this will enable you to look at the documents and kind of start to navigate them yourselves. We note here that FDA says it's reasonable to believe that the Battelle decontamination system may be effective at preventing healthcare personnel exposure to pathogenic airborne particulates during filtering face respirators shortages during the COVID-19 pandemic by decontaminating compatible N95 respirators that are potentially contaminated. That's great, that's wonderful. Here's the things that they have to include with their shipments: instructions, labeling, fact sheets. So they're not able to just do this willy-nilly. They've got labeling that they have to put on it. What they're using is vapor phase hydrogen peroxide, and it's not compatible with cellulose-based materials. So they've got some limitations on it. Additionally, scrolling down, this comes as a surprise to many people. Battelle is not shipping their systems to hospitals. The hospitals have to ship their N95s to Battelle. And it doesn't cover other types of equipment, just the N95 respirators. Battelle has to maintain records of the chain of custody, and they've got to track the number of times that a given respirator has been decontaminated. And I believe elsewhere in here it says they've got to mark it on the respirator with a Sharpie. So this is very preliminary, but there is now a way to get N95s decontaminated, approved by FDA. And there's avenues here for others who are working on decontamination, which we'll talk about in just a minute, to get similar EUAs. So we're going to open it up right now for any questions on the Battelle document. We'll do our best job to that we can to answer them. And our folks, if you want to type a question into the Q&A box, our folks will take a look at that and try to get it answered live here.
Nothing coming up?
Nothing coming up? Okay, if anyone's got a question on that, bring it up in your own time. Next, we're going to look at a guidance this is enforcement policy for sterilizers, disinfectant devices, and air purifiers. We've heard from a lot of you working on these kind of disinfectant systems, so this will be of interest to you. FDA notes that they've got at least 3 things in view here. Sterilizers, which are medical devices, which are intended to render medical devices sterile, versus disinfectant devices, which are intended to kill pathogens by chemical or physical means, but not necessarily all microbial forms, such as bacterial spores. Those are usually chemical or physical disinfectant devices or ultraviolet disinfectant devices. They also have in view air purifying devices, which are intended for medical purposes to kill pathogens and microorganisms in the air by exposure to UV radiation or remove them through filtration. So depending on what you're working on, you might want to place yourself in one of those categories. Great statement here by FDA. FDA does not intend to object to the distribution and use of sterilizers, disinfectant devices, and air purifiers that are intended to be effective at killing SARS-CoV-2 virus, but do not already have FDA marketing authorization. That's great news. As an example, this would apply to a manufacturer of a new medical air purifier that has not been approved or cleared and that is effective in filtering out dust particles and bacteria, where the manufacturer would like to modify the filter mesh size in order to filter out viruses, including SARS-CoV-2 virus. So that's great news for folks who are thinking about doing this sort of a thing. But I want to note something to you. The next statement says, the enforcement policies set forth in this guidance do not apply to these devices that are intended to prevent or reduce the risks of hospital-acquired infections or COVID-19. Well, that doesn't make sense. Aren't they talking out of both sides of their mouth? You can say you want to filter out SARS-CoV-2, but you can't say you're preventing COVID-19. This is actually very consistent with FDA's approach. What they're saying is, if you want to make a technical claim, that's fine, but don't make a treatment claim. Don't say that we're reducing the incidence of hospital-acquired infections or COVID-19, which is the disease that comes from SARS-CoV-2. You can make the technical claims, and they're giving you guidance in here to make the technical claims. Don't make the treatment claims. That's their guidance. We'll scroll down here to sterilizers. FDA does recommend, if you're bringing, and note, it's a recommendation. This is not legal advice, but we do note that they are making a recommendation and not a requirement here. Recommends that any modifications, including changes, be designed, evaluated, and validated in accordance with FDA recognized standards, and they list a bunch of those standards. So please at least consider the following standards in your design and development. Similarly, with disinfectant devices, these are devices that don't completely sterilize something, but reduce the bioburden. More standards. Please, FDA recommends any modifications be designed, evaluated, and validated in accordance with these standards. They also note that there's low-level disinfection, intermediate-level disinfection, and high-level disinfection. And they also have other recommendations that you should be checking. So they're giving you guidance that you should be doing. It appears from this guidance that they have not made this mandatory, but they've certainly given you clear guidance here. And if you're making an air purifier, similar things are true, except they're not recommending standards compliance here. They're just saying, check the following. Can you demonstrate a 4-log reduction? Can you demonstrate effectiveness against gram-positive and gram-negative species? So great guidance in here. If you're making one of these systems, and we've talked to people in the last few days who are, please, please crack this open. Ask us for help if you need it. We'll pause there briefly for questions on the disinfectant and sterilization devices, or any questions that may have come in on the Battelle allowance. Barring that, we're going to talk about the NIOSH approved respirators. This is what we first talked about last Friday as a group. And
Hey, Gene.
Yes, Aaron.
There's a couple of questions in the Q&A about the sterilization and disinfectant guidance.
Let's pause and touch on those so we don't get too far dissociated. We're going to touch on face masks in just a minute. What do we have, Aaron?
Sorry, got to unmute. Let's see, we've got one question. Do air purifiers and negative pressure systems lie in the same buckets for some of that?
Oh, that's a great question. Let's take a quick look here. In going through this, I did not see anything about negative pressure systems, but let's take a quick look here, about 30 seconds. I did have a hand raise there, and we know the person. So I'm going to, Lindsay Clee, really quick, you're live. Do you have insight on this for us?
Yeah, can you hear me right now?
We can, yep.
I haven't looked at this particular PDF, so that was part of where I was wondering if negative pressure was in there. I do know that CDC has some specs, but I'm not sure if FDA is giving the specs.
Okay, this sounds like something we're going to follow up on with the people who asked the question. Lindsay, would you pop the CDC information into the chat for everybody?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And the second question, we've seen a couple questions about UV for disinfecting. One was specific to using like Keurig lamps for nail polish and stuff like that.
Also a great question. So this is under the disinfectant devices we're assuming at this point. And if we come back up here, the UV radiation chamber disinfection devices are regulated as class 2 devices. So these are also the types that they're talking about. It is probably, and we got to check on this and we can get more answers to folks. I have to say it's probably the situation where, depending on what you sell it as, if you're selling a bulb out there, well, people do that all the time and they don't make claims about them. But if you're selling into something that would fit into one of these categories and you're going to tell people that that's what it's for, FDA is going to look at that and say, well, what was your labeling? Were you selling it for this purpose? In which case the initial recommendation would be to comply with what you find in this document.
Mm-hmm. And with the UV stuff, I think there may be some wavelength specific values in there that where some are actually more able to do the disinfecting than others.
That's a true statement. Yep.
And there's another question. Can you come up with, to find the difference between sanitize and disinfect?
Wow, this is a great question. The term sanitize does not appear in this document. So the question that I think will be valid here is whether or not you are making the claim that you're a disinfectant. If you want to call sanitization disinfection versus sterilization, the question is, are you claiming to kill everything? Are you sterilizing it? Or are you simply reducing the bioburden? That's really the distinction that FDA presents in A and B of this document. So is it free from viable microorganisms, or have we just gotten rid of a lot of them? That would be the question that I think is operative. Any other questions that we had on those two documents? Great questions. Thank you. And thank you, Lindsay, for popping in there for us. Okay, if not, we are going to.
Sorry, Gene, I was working on not muting myself.
Excellent.
I think this one is interesting from an anonymous attendee. There's talk about using dry heat, such as 70°C, 30 minutes. This may be easily handled by marketed toaster ovens. Is this addressed? I want to say out loud, please don't put anything in a toaster oven to start with. But then the dry heat question overall in the guidance.
That is a great question. And I think what I'm going to do is when we talk about the face mask guidance in just a minute, I think we'll address that one in there, because that one is where we have the reprocessing guidance that FDA has offered. And so I think our folks who are considering dry heat should look at that list that's in that document and should consider whether they can meet the things that FDA is asking for. And if they can, they should get on the horn with FDA and start discussing those, because we have heard those indications that dry heat could be an effective method. So that's great. We'll touch on that. Any other Q&A that we should be aware of right now? Great. Well, I want to go on to the document that really started it all, the NIOSH N95 emergency use authorization that FDA has issued and reissued, and I believe a third time reissued. The most recent changes are really wonderful because FDA has said you don't need to submit to us if you want to basically take a NIOSH approved N95 respirator and start using it for medical purposes. They say, if we find it on the NIOSH list, we will move it over to an approved list. As of last Friday, you had to submit to them. Today, they'll move it over for you if you are NIOSH approved. That is our current understanding of it. I do want to highlight a few things through this. In scope here are non-powered air purifying particulate FFRs that are approved by a NIOSH in accordance with 42 CFR Part 84. That's N95 basically, as well as a couple other categorizations. And other powered air purifying respirators, or PAPRs, approved by NIOSH. Expired respirators, they are making allowance for expired respirators to be used. And any authorized respirator that now has been decontaminated, since now we have Battelle and hopefully others who will be able to do decontamination. So that's in scope here. You do not, this is new news, you do not need to submit requests to FDA to request authorization of additional NIOSH approved respirators. If it's on the NIOSH list, you're good to go. So that represents a change from the March 2nd letter, which we talked about last time. I want to bounce over before we take questions on this. There are requirements. We won't touch on these requirements, but if you want to sell N95s as medical devices, check these requirements in the guidance. I also want to bounce over to the imported N95 discussion here, because this goes hand in hand with the NIOSH one. FDA has obviously said if it's good enough for NIOSH, it's good enough for us during the current crisis. They're also saying that if it's good enough for these other countries that are listed down here, it's good enough for us. So if you have a filtering particulate respirator that has passed standards compliance testing in these countries, Australia, Brazil, Europe, Japan, Korea, or Mexico, under these performance standards, FDA wants to see those coming in as well. Additionally, if you have a license to sell, marketing authorization in Europe under the CE mark, in Australia under the Register of Therapeutic Goods, the Health Canada license, or the Japan Pharmaceuticals and Medical Device license, that's a open door to bring that in. Again, if you haven't got these standards compliances, you haven't gotten the certification, you're not allowed to sell, this EUA doesn't apply to you. If you're not N95 NIOSH certified, that EUA doesn't apply to you. There's other things you can do, but these two don't apply to you unless you already or can quickly hold those certifications. It still says that the importers have to talk to FDA to get their devices listed. There's an email address at the bottom that you can file there. So that's on the imported ones. Before we talk about other devices, face masks, that aren't yet certified or cleared. So again, we're going to draw a line here. Certified and cleared, NIOSH or international, that's what we're talking about right now. In a minute, we're going to talk about what if I don't have a NIOSH certification or an international certification. But right now, let's take any questions that we have on NIOSH and internationally certified respirators. Type those right into the Q&A box if you do have those questions. Certified respirators.
I think there was a question about, if I can find it, for the decontaminated N95s, is there any need to verify the functionality after the decontamination?
That is a great question. We'd have to go a little bit more in depth into what Battelle's particular process is. I believe you'll find that we can check this when we go into the next document. They, I believe, have function check stuff down in what FDA wants to see. I do remember seeing in the Battelle document that they have put some burden back on the healthcare system to at least do a visual check of the respirators when they receive them back. But in large part, I believe what you're going to find is that this is a We believe that this is going to decontaminate them, and we believe that it's not going to destroy them. I don't know if you're seeing as much validation testing of that, of the actual cleaned masks. I think this is a emergency use situation. Any other questions on those?
I think there were some also questions about reuse of N95s. I think just in general.
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know what the specific question is there, but I think the concern that everybody has is a lot of folks are being asked to use an N95 all day long when that clearly wasn't the original intent of it. I don't think we have good information on the use life of those, and I haven't seen anything specifically talking about that. But if you do have information on that, use life of those and how long one can be used, that would be good to get into the chat box for folks. Any other questions, or should we go on to the face mask guidance, the enforcement guidance?
Gene, there's a question asking if there's any recommendation for disinfection using microwave. I don't believe so, but.
Great question. No, we haven't seen anything on microwave specific, but in this next document, we'll talk about mask disinfection, and we'll see what kinds of things you'd want to think about if you're thinking about doing disinfection. So let's go there next.
And Gene, if you get a chance, can you talk about some of the 3D printed mask designs that have been popping up?
Certainly. Let's touch on that at the end of this before we go over to ventilators. Somebody remind me if we miss it. All right, enforcement policy for face masks and respirators. So this is not an EUA, this is an enforcement policy. This is telling you what FDA intends to do with respect to the following. Now we're going to scroll down past a lot of the common things that we said we see in almost all of these. And to this beautiful statement, thank you so much, FDA. FDA recognizes that when alternatives such as FDA cleared masks or respirators are unavailable, individuals, including healthcare professionals, might improvise personal protective equipment. FDA does not intend to object to individuals' distribution and use of improvised PPE when no alternatives such as FDA cleared masks or respirators are available. We're just really glad they said that. Thank you so much. Let's come down here. There are different devices in view. And the first one is the one that I want you all to think about if you are thinking about producing masks. Please talk to each other about this. Face masks and N95 respirators not intended for a medical purpose. Listen to what FDA has to say about this. Face masks and N95 respirators are medical devices when they meet the definition of a device, when they're intended for use in the diagnosis or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease. Other face masks are marketed to the general public for general non-medical purposes, such as use in construction and other industrial applications. Because they are not intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, FDA device marketing authorization is not required, and all other requirements of the FD&C Act do not apply. I've talked to multiple people in the last few days who say, oh, we've got to get an EUA, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, and hey, we can solve, we can cure COVID. Consider that FDA is completely taking the reins off and really never had reins to begin with if you're not selling a medical device and you're not making medical claims. Please think long and hard about this before your group says, oh, we've got to claim this and we've got to claim that, we've got to put this on the label and everything else. Consider whether you can sell something as a general use face mask with no claims. Please consider that. We'll get more masks into the hands of healthcare professionals if we can think about that. What FDA is going to look at, like we said before, is whether or not they're labeled or otherwise intended for use by a healthcare professional, whether they're labeled or otherwise for use in a healthcare facility, and whether they include any drugs, biologics, or antimicrobial agents. Don't think that by putting an antimicrobial agent in, you're going to get there faster. You won't. The second category, we're outside of certified face masks here, right? Face masks intended to provide intended for a medical purpose that are not intended to provide liquid barrier protection. And there are things you have to do for that, but it's largely labeling. Okay, if you want to say this is for medical purposes, there's a lot of labeling requirements in here, but there aren't yet that we could see any testing requirements. And then finally, surgical masks intended to provide liquid barrier protection. We need to protect our surgeons from flammable situations and from liquid spray at high velocity. And so we need to have those things checked. And so there's basically two tests. There's fluid resistance testing, as well as flammability requirements testing. And so depending on what you want to sell or distribute a mask for, we'd really encourage you to consider reduce your claims as far as possible and say as little as possible about it, and then comply with FDA's expectations. Here's a summary, and I hope the PowerPoint is showing up. If you're trying to do an N95 or equivalent with particulate filtering certifications, then you need to do standards compliance and or national level approvals. If you're doing a surgical mask, the big focus is liquid penetration and flammability. If you're doing medical masks that aren't a liquid barrier, there are certainly labeling requirements and more. We're just highlighting the requirements. This is not the entire list. But if you're making a construction face mask, it's not a medical device. So please consider where you best fit if you're part of that effort. And don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't bite off more than the hospitals need. They need all of these, but they certainly need a lot of basic use masks as well. So please consider where you fit. We're going to pause there for, oh, we said talk about 3D printing. FDA does have a 3D printing guidance that we touched on last Friday. To our knowledge, it hasn't been updated. The basic focus there is please use materials that aren't going to break. There are materials like nylon that are certainly going to be better. We actually had a company on the call on Friday. Hope they're back today. They can make themselves known in the chat and also at our manufacturer and materials session later on here. They are good at high volume printing in nylon. It would be much better to print things in tough materials. FDA also says, please at least check that the parts work before you give them to a clinician. If you're in dire straits and you have to do something, at least find a way to check that they work before you give them. It's kind of common sense, but you'd be surprised how frequently people forget to just check the basic fit and function of parts. So please do that. Those are some of the summaries from the 3D printing guidance. If you have any other specific questions, type them in the Q&A box and we'll talk about them here momentarily.
And Gene,
Over
I
to
think,
our team. Yeah, Aaron.
for the 3D printed mask, or I think just about any mask or other PPE, the fit is a very important factor in all of that. Because I know with a lot of the masks, there's actually fit training to make sure you're wearing the masks appropriately so that you don't have potential alternate pathways to get in for pathogens and stuff.
Yes, that's great, Aaron. Thanks for bringing that up. Were there any more questions on masks there that we can direct traffic on?
Yes, there's a good one about opportunities of importing masks from China, and can you comment on the usability of those?
Say that one more time, Adrian.
When you're importing a mask from another country, what is it? What do you have to do, or do you have to do anything to be able to use those in this situation?
Yeah, great question. It again,
N95 specifically.
Oh, N95 specifically. N95 specifically, you're going to go to that imported non-NIOSH letter that FDA issued. I trust that it's showing back up on the screen here. Yeah, actually, Aaron, we should call out, we are posting these to a page on Intubing's website, so people can get to these documents, but this is the imported non-NIOSH approved disposable filtering face piece. So if you want to bring in something that is substantially N95 equivalent, has a certification associated with it, you're going to want to go through this guidance. Call us if you need help with this. But this is what you're going to have to go through. And you're going to want to first point, make sure that you are either on the market in Europe, Australia, Health Canada, or Japan, and or that you have one of these performance standards certification in hand from Australia, Brazil, Europe, Japan, Korea, and Mexico. That's what you gotta have in hand to come contact FDA to say we're importing these. If you don't have that and you want to import them with new labeling as dust masks, great. That's wonderful. We need more dust masks too. Other questions right now? Great. Let's jump over to the ventilators. So this is an interesting one. It's got a lot of people excited. I know we're all excited by Medtronic coming out and releasing the design files for their PB560. That is wonderful news. I think it would be fascinating to talk with a bunch of the companies here about whether we could get an effort together to start to not invent, just adapt and take those and start to build them locally. That would be amazing. We need the resources and we need the collaborators, but I think we've got them on this call. But this EUA, this emergency use authorization, is not a license to invent the world's best new ventilator. That's not what FDA is looking for here. This is about ventilators, ventilator tubing connectors, and ventilator accessories. And if we scroll down here, you've got to get added to what FDA calls Appendix B. You've got to get through a demonstration of compliance of some sort. Now, this isn't a traditional 510K. I believe they've exempted registration and listing, although I've got to check that down below. This is not legal advice, this is just my term for it, but there's almost like a mini 510K. We're doing a little bit of regulatory oversight here, FDA is, and when they've seen what they want to see, they'll put you on Appendix B, and then you can distribute those ventilators. So they've made it a lot easier. I think the thing that's going to trip a lot of people up is they're going to be looking at whether you're complying with the applicable FDA recognized standards identified in Appendix A associated with this document. So please, if you're thinking about ventilators and you want to do ventilators, let's talk and let's make sure that we're complying with the standards that are in Appendix A so that you're in a good position to submit to FDA. They can look through it and make a ruling on whether they're willing to put you into Appendix B. There's a little more here than just saying, I designed a ventilator. There is checking that has to go on. So I think that's important to recognize. But again, among the teams that we have on this call, there's plenty of resources to be able to go through an effort like this if the right people step forward. And a company like Being is happy to get out there and help folks do that. So please let us know. We'll pause briefly for questions on ventilators. Any questions on ventilators?
Gene, there was a question on some of the situations where they're actually using one ventilator across multiple patients and they sort of construct a manifold to do that. Is any of that covered in the guidance?
I believe there was I apologize, I don't have this at the tip of my tongue. I believe that there was a statement in this. No, it's another document. We can follow up. Please note the questioner and we'll follow up with them. But I mean, FDA does recognize in their 3D printing guidance that people are going to go out there and print stuff and they want some basic sanity checks there, but they recognize that people are going to do things in emergencies. What this is about is if you want to get out there and start distributing, like if you're a company, you want to start distributing ventilator accessories, they want you to go through this. Covered in this is different types of use for ventilators or other breathing systems. So if your ventilator wasn't authorized for use with 2 patients, the company that's got it authorized in the first place can go out there and get into Appendix B with the change in labeling. So they can say, we're going to start using this for up to 4 people or up to 9 people or whatever they want to. So there is a path within this to get some oversight over those kinds of uses. But we can follow up with the questioner if they have more specific questions. Any other questions? Great, wonderful questions all. We're going to touch here really briefly on gowns and other apparel. We want to get to interactions with all of you in just a minute here. But FDA did just issue guidance on gowns and gloves. And you're going to see a very similar trend here as we saw in everything else. which is, what are you claiming? What are you saying this is good for? And if we come down to the highlighted sections, we have this statement again for gowns and gloves. FDA recognizes that when alternatives such as FDA cleared gowns and other surgical apparel are unavailable, individuals, including healthcare professionals, might improvise personal protective equipment. You note that they didn't say companies. I don't know whether that is a meaningful statement there, but it's worth noting that they said individuals and not companies in that kind of statement. FDA does not intend to object to individuals' distribution and use of improvised PPE when no alternatives such as FDA cleared gowns, other surgical apparel, and or gloves are available. They distinguish between minimal or low barrier protection, as well as moderate or high barrier protection, and state ANSI standards for those level 1, 2, and 3 protections that one should be considering if one is putting a gown out there. Keep in mind, if you're not marketing it for a medical purpose, but you're credibly marketing it to the public for a general use purpose, same language here. FDA device marketing authorization is not required, and all the other requirements of the FD&C Act do not apply. So consider how you can minimize your claims and still get something useful out. That is like point number 1 for all of these things. Don't say more than you have to. Give people something that can work. Only make claims if that's what you're actually going to sell it for. Coming down to this, I just want to reiterate, FDA says they're going to consider whether you've labeled it for a given purpose or whether you've not put these claims in your labeling. They have something very similar for gloves. If anyone else out there is trying to get gloves out, I don't think we're going to belabor it here, but you're going to see almost identical language for gloves. Consider what you're labeling it for, and otherwise they do have guidance on standards that you should be complying with. So let's pause there for a minute. These are the documents we wanted to cover with all of you. Hope they're of use to you. Follow up with questions in Q&A, follow up by email afterwards. We'll take any more questions specific to these documents right now. Please just let us know, and I'll turn it over to Aaron if we have any more questions coming in.
I think at this point we could probably work our way through the Q&A stuff. Okay, we scan through and see if there's something we can work on, grab from there. There's a question, is there any track and trace requirement for ventilators after being distributed?
That is a great question. I can't answer it off the top of my head. We will check the document and get back to you that question. Thank you very much. Any others?
Does the FDA have any oversight for open source medical device designs? Not manufacturing or selling. So this is maybe people that are designing, that are building, taking an open source collective design and then building them independently.
That's a great question. And any of the other folks here on our staff who have an opinion on that, I think we have to tread a little carefully, because it seems what FDA is doing, this is not legal advice, but what seems what FDA is doing is they're saying, like always, we're limiting distribution and claims surrounding distribution. The details of how you built it on the back end do matter, but I don't think that's the primary focus of the things that we're seeing right now. So I would say look at the hurdle as being what you're going to say about the finished device, and whether it does what you say that it does, and complying with any of FDA's expectations. We're a little bit less worried about the how you got to the design at the moment, but that's just an opinion. Anything else from our staff?
Do the regulations apply for parts or pieces supplied to the manufacturer putting the ventilators together?
As usual, most of that, and again, this is just based on our experience as medical device developers. This is what we do every day. We're not lawyers, but generally, the manufacturer of record is the one who bears responsibility for the device that's put on the market. It's up to them to ensure that the parts that they're getting from their suppliers are sufficient. They, in turn, often put requirements on those suppliers and audits and things like that. But ultimately, that responsibility comes down to the manufacturer of record who is putting the finished device on the market. So any other questions?
Somebody noted that there are N95 masks that are that are FDA cleared that are currently being imported, and that sort of falls into that. Have they already gone through all the scrutiny that FDA has, and some of them have. Yep.
And that's phenomenal, right? If you've got masks that FDA has already blessed and you're importing them for medical purposes, that's great. That's the first thing we want in healthcare practitioners' hands. And after that comes the certified ones, and after that comes the ones that they're making enforcement discretion on. Great.
And here's a good. Do you think the FDA statements where they won't get involved in individuals where no medical devices are available would apply to doctors or Walmart distributing snorkel masks and silicone tubing to attach to hospital inline filters?
Wow. Well, that's I got to parse that one as I think about it.
Throwing some curveballs. I think
that was great.
There is a bit of an. I think one thing we typically say is there is a general understanding with the FDA that medical professionals like doctors and so on have more leeway to do things than what a manufacturer would have. So doctors can improvise as needed for the best of their patients. That doesn't mean that individuals can improvise for the best of other people. It just means that doctors can go out and get snorkel masks and silicone tubing and do whatever they can to keep their patients alive.
Anytime you distribute more than one of something, you're suddenly in the situation where you could be a medical device manufacturer, and it becomes incumbent upon you. Great answer, Aaron. Thank you for that. Any other questions?
I think there are some people raising their hands. It may be worth taking a look through that in a little bit.
Okay, let's do this then. What we're going to do next is we're going to go to our community open forum check-ins, and then we're going to have time at the end for folks with general comments to make them. So what we're going to do first of all is we are going to go to our conveners. I know that we have some folks on the phone who are part of different systems. Last time we heard from U of M and others who have efforts where they want you to get your data to them. They want you to say, here's what we can do. We're not the only game in town in terms of convening people. We want you to get these into other databases. I believe that there were going to be some folks from MEDC on the call today. If I believe it was Bobby or Natalie are on the call, can you raise your hand in Zoom? And we'd love to hear from you. There's Bobby. Bobby, you should be live if I hit that correctly. Can you say something?
Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, Bobby. Thank you.
Okay, sorry
We'd
about
love
that.
to hear about you and about what you guys need and are offering.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Bobby Chazlis. I'm the director of Pure Michigan Business Connect. It is a program, a procurement matchmaking program of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So really quickly, what we're working with is we're working really closely with the State Emergency Operations Center, the Department of Technology Management and Budget, as well as our friends at the Michigan Manufacturing Association and Michigan Manufacturing and Technology Center. I know that's a ton of acronyms, but overall, what I'd like to get out is that we are building a supplier list with current and future capabilities to produce needed personal protection equipment. So working to provide that equipment and those suppliers directly to the state, as well as some other hospital systems that have submitted through our online website. So we'll be receiving, demand side and as well as supply side, both if you are currently making PPE or are intending to, update and retrofit any of your production factory with new equipment to produce PPE in the future. So the website that you can find all this information at is pmbc.connect.space/COVID-19. And I will put that in the chat here as soon as I'm done. But we will be sharing the specifications and requirements that we've received from a few partners, and then really communicating those with the suppliers that is submitted through our form. So we're working really closely to try to be kind of a convener of, any face shields or non-respirator masks that are being manufactured here in the state.
That is phenomenal, Bobby. Thank you so much for that. We're out here just trying to churn people up, but it's really important that people get into these databases because this is where we want to aggregate things. The state's got a database. Let's get everybody in there as well. And we're circulating contact information to for people who make themselves known within the chat of this session, as well as last Friday's. We're going to circulate that. We got a summary document that comes around, but these are going to go to folks like PMBC. Thank you, Bobby, for that. We'll look forward to the information on that. Any other conveners, folks with big efforts to aggregate data? I know that U of M asked last time for you all to go out and fill out their survey. That would be great if you can do that. And there are some others as well. Anybody else who's a convener and has a very large database that's kind of statewide that we should know about? Got Renee Lorne. You're on. Just unmute your microphone. There we are.
Hi guys, my name is Rayanna LeWarn. Everyone calls me Ray. I'm not the convener of this list, but there is a national list of scientists that's being convened. It currently covers all 50 states. Last time I checked, which was almost a week ago, it had 7,000 7,000 scientists and researchers all across the country who have volunteered their skills, laboratories, and reagents to process COVID samples, train others, develop vaccines. It was started by a Harvard scientist just on his own. I did put the link, which is an access request form to the full unredacted database in the chat list. And then the second link is to the form itself for scientists and researchers to add their skills and supplies to the database for local and state and national support organizations.
Thank you, Ariana. Thank you very much for that. That's great. We'll look forward to including that as well. Appreciate that very much.
Yeah, thanks, Ariana. We'll get your name right next time.
That's great. Any other conveners, real quick? We're going to go on to hospital systems next. Anybody representing a hospital system, just to check in on status or what you want us to know. We had a great check-in from a bunch of hospital systems last time, telling us about their needs. Most of those are publicly known, but if you're with a hospital system and you'd like to just give us a status check about what you guys are up against, please raise your hand now. Nikki Kennedy, you're on.
Hey, Gene, thanks again for doing this. So I'm Nikki Kennedy, private practice vascular surgeon. I work out of Henry Ford, but I do not represent Henry Ford. I am pretty well connected with a lot of different hospital systems in the area. And I've been trying to make these connections over the past few days since the last meeting. The general word that I'm getting is that a lot of the large health systems here in Southeast Michigan have done a pretty good job of securing their large chains for gowns, masks, those kinds of things. What they're looking for now are ventilators, diagnostic and testing reagent supplies. N95s are still in demand, so all of that has been really helpful. What I have found is there are a lot of smaller groups out there, chiropractors, home health nurses, people who don't have the huge buying power of health systems, but they have very limited access to any kind of PPD. So if anyone is interested in getting in touch with them, I have multiple calls out. I've already had a few people coming back with their managers asking specifically to be connected for some supplies. Please reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat box.
Great, thank you, Nikki. We're going to go over really quickly to Dr. Ramon Berger. Just unmute your microphone and you'll be live.
No, I am here. My name is Ramon Berger, and I am a retired vascular surgeon from University of Michigan. I want to ask you if there is any regulation regarding the use of protective equipment, because I see in the pictures of health interaction between health workers and patients that people wear protective gowns, masks, gloves, but nobody or very few people have their head covered. The head, the front of the head, which is as likely to receive those pellets of water containing virus as it is your nose or your mouth. And I wonder if any manufacturers are building any headgear that can be waterproof and used as simultaneously with the masks.
Thank you for that, Dr. Brigere. That's a great question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask when we get to our manufacturers segment here in just a minute, if anybody knows of anything like that. I believe I saw a news item come around that folks were creating, basic surgical caps, but that's not water repellent, as you say. So great question. And when we get to our manufacturer segment, I'm going to welcome anybody who could answer Dr. Brigere's question there. Is anybody thinking about water repellent headgear? Because frankly, if you're going to get sprayed with this stuff, it's not just your face that you're worried about. It's going to get all over you. So we'd be interested to hear more from our manufacturers. Thank you, Dr. Brigere. Any other hospital representatives? Raise your hand if you're there. Okay, if not, we're going to go on to our material suppliers. We've talked with a lot of great material suppliers. I think I saw Jerry Douglas's hand there a minute ago. I know you were shipping materials to some local collaborators. Feel free to raise your hand again to catch us up on what you're doing. Any other material suppliers on the call who can tell us about what you're offering and what we can, who we can connect you with? All right, I'm seeing Rob Harrison. Rob, if you're unmuted, you're live.
Hey, thanks for doing this. Rob Harrison. I actually represent Intac Automated, but we did recently partner up with a supplier for 3D printed materials. At this time, they have close to 6,000 kilograms of material that they're ready to disperse. They were actually talking about trying to do a bunch of multiple donations. So anyone that was going to 3D print supplies, they would be getting material and stuff for free. I can post the contact information for that company in chat if anybody wants it.
That would be great, Rob. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. All right, we're going over to Joe Perot. I hope I said your name right there.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, Joe Perot, Universal Marketing. I put a chat onto the regarding supply, material supply. I've been working in the category for 25 plus years in multiple channels, but and we are supplying both on a domestic and import basis N95 and KN95 and other masks and other medical. I misspoke on my chat that I wrote on the FDA. The FDA is I am told, on our product is momentarily coming, but it is on a KN95 mask. But we are having the ability to produce in large quantities. So we're expecting that any time now. And then we're planning to warehouse that product in Cleveland so that it would be available in large quantities and in short time. But we are waiting for that last piece, which we're expecting literally any day now.
Joe, just two really quick questions for you. I think I hear you say that you're a material supplier. You do have access to these materials and people might be able to get them from you. Are you a certified manufacturer of N95s or are you going to be producing something uncertified?
I'll make available the certifications that are available. That will be through, because we have various sources and that we're getting materials. So to answer that question, I'll probably have to go offline with somebody and be happy to do that.
That's fine. Feel free to send us the extra information there and we can post it to the summary document before we send it out.
Sounds good.
That's great. Thank you so much, Joe. Okay, we're going to talk to any manufacturers, and by that I mean either finished device manufacturers who have something that you can offer the community, or manufacturers who can build either parts or full assemblies. We heard last time from our friends over at Keystone Product Development. We heard from our friends at MedBio. We heard from companies like Gentherm and Roush and what they can do. And so a lot of this is getting people put together to do the next thing. And that's what we want to talk about here at the end. But do we have any manufacturers on the line? Raise your hand. All right, I'm with Gina Tuttle.
Yes, I'm Gina.
There we
Sorry
go.
about that.
No worries.
I'm Gina Tuttle from Sturgis Molded Products. We are a med pharma.
Gina, turn your volume all the way down. Turn your volume all the way down so that it's just you
Okay.
talking into the microphone, so you can't hear me.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect. Sorry, Gina Tuttle from Sturgis Molded Products. And we are a med pharma class 1 medical device manufacturer. We currently do not have our own products that we can provide because we manufacture for others' intellectual property. However, we do have plastic injection molding, design, engineering, and manufacturing support that we can provide. We have 70 presses, 50 ton to 1900 ton.
Great, thank you for that, Gina. If there's more information, please put it in the chat. Your echo is there. Again, if you've got, please try not to call in if you've got open speakers. Make sure you're wearing a headset so that we don't get that kind of an effect. Appreciate it. I'm going to go over to our friend Jim Metzger at Keystone Product Development. Jim, how's it going today?
Good, Gene. It's going well. Just a quick update. I know we mentioned our capabilities on the last call. We are starting face shield production this week. We've actually also made a limited supply of hand sanitizer, believe it or not.
Great.
Something that we initially intended, but apparently we're pretty good at that too. We're also still moving forward with the test sample collection kits. So the single-use sterile swabs and the vials. And again, health systems that are out there, if you have specific specifications for those, shoot them over and we'll try to address your needs.
Thank you, Jim. Really appreciate that. Any new information, please stick it in the chat and we'll make sure it gets up there. I appreciate you getting the word out about this forum. Okay, we're going to go over to Jerry Douglas. Jerry, you're back on. Just unmute. Let's see, Jerry, can you unmute? All right, we're going to come back to you, Jerry, in just a second. David Shirkey, you are live.
Hi, everybody. David Shirkey from Jackson, Michigan. I work at Orbit Form. We're an industrial machine builder, and we started a few weeks ago taking some of our, knowledge, and we have a cabinet that can fit 12 N95s, and it's got, germicidal UV lights in there. And we've made, we're on our second version now, making 5 this week. So we think it's something that is very valid, and I'll put the website and my email in the chat.
David, that's great. If you need any help going over the FDA guidance on that and seeing if we can get you an EUA for decontamination, let us know, because that's awesome stuff that you're doing. Glad to see it. All right. I'm going to try Jerry Douglas one more time here. Jerry, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Yes. My name is Jerry Douglas with Innovative Air Management. I was on the last webinar, and I explained a little bit that we're a large manufacturer of the barrier material that's used in the mask. It's we have both N95 and an N99. That is a PTFE based product or membrane. And since our last webinar, I've already started distributing that material to many of the mask makers. So I just wanted to throw that out there for everybody.
We were very excited about that, Jerry. To hear that a lot of people got connected on the last call and you're able to start distributing that to them. That's great news. Thank you so much. If there's any new updates, put them in the chat. Appreciate it. All right, we are looking at Jeff Simek. Jeff, you're on.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hey, we have significant assets in additive and in injection molding. So without hesitation, we moved some of these additive designs into our injection molding for high volume to get these face shields to the healthcare workers as soon as possible. So just wanted to note, if anyone's looking for face shields, we've got a strong effort forward with a lot of productivity happening at RCO Engineering. And we're working to get some volume to every hospital that we can, and then go in and backfill the orders after, so that we continue to be a part of this solution here. But I'll post a link on here shortly in the chat room for where you can go see.
Please do. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Buzz Baldwin, you are on. If you unmute, there you go.
Sorry, there we go. Just hit unmute. Can you hear me now?
We can.
All right, great. Yeah, sorry about that. And forgive me, guys. I'm just kind of jumping in here late, so I don't know what's been on tap already. I'm with 3D Print Life. We're a filament manufacturer in the US for FDM printers. We do sell FDM printers. We're in the process of donating 4,000 kilos of PLA for printing of the Prusa face shields. We're connected with some of the guys in New York, look at 3D Brooklyn, et cetera, and we're trying to get about 1,000 kilos down to them right now. Get more people to sign up on we've got a support network we've created. It's 3dprintlifesupport.com, where users can sign up and offer to, assist in FDM printing for the hospital network, PPEs and other devices. We are connected in our customer base with over 1,000 hospitals in the US, so we can submit a call to action to connect them both together. And we have another material that is, it's not our material, it's from Copper 3D. I don't know if you've seen this out of Chile. It's an antimicrobial filament, and we're virtually sold out with some stock for Mass Beth is and children. We're looking to make many thousand kilos more, but it is a material that can be blended with other materials for injection molding. So It doesn't have to just be with PLA for FDM.
Great. Well, I'm going to have to cut you off here. Please put the additional information in the chat. We'd love to have it. We've got to make some room for other people, but please do put that in there. That's great stuff. Thanks for participating. Okay.
I just want to jump in and give a note for everybody posting in the chat. Make sure you have the all attendees selection checked in the drop down, so that everybody can see your information as it comes through.
Great. Thanks for that, Aaron. Okay, I'm going to go to Olaf, and I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Olaf. I do apologize. Maybe you can tell us, but Olaf, I believe you are live. Nope, it looks like we lost Olaf. Okay, we're going to go to Kimberly Hankey.
Hello, everybody. Kim Hankey, Elm Park Labs. We provide XR technologies, so any type of instructions for assembly, shipping, any type of product, we can provide that and get that out on a global scale on an iPhone or Android.
Okay, so if we need help with instructions or training or things like that, we could talk to you for quick distribution.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Appreciate it. We're going to go to Cindy Wadnicki. You are live. You're live if you're unmuted. Try unmuting. There you go. Nope. One more time. Try unmuting. There you go.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, thank you. I was on the last call as well. We're a small manufacturer in Rochester Hills. I failed to mention that we do have a 20-foot CNC machine that can handle large cuts, but it's for soft goods. Our current manufacturing is primarily covers for sound equipment, but they include large PA systems and some complex storage requirements. What we're currently doing is probably most compatible with making body bags. As somebody mentioned that they needed, I think that we could have a very short learning curve. We're used to doing zippers, that kind of thing, but we would definitely need materials and specs.
Great, thank you for that, Cindy, appreciate it. Sarah Lights.
Yeah, I'm speaking for Sarah Lights. My name is Joe Hillebrand. We're with a company called Altus. We manufacture mobile workstations in Grand Rapids. We are interested in making ventilator carts. We're looking for the hole patterns for the GM, Ford, and Medtronic ventilators, so we can produce those pretty quickly. Past week, we've deployed over 500 carts at Beaumont and Spectrum alone. And these are the point of care nursing carts that they use to chart on. So
That is, that's really great. I know we've got some people from a lot of those organizations on here. I think we saw some people from Ford in the registration. They're welcome to make themselves known if they want, but I would encourage you to put your information in the chat and it will go out to them. And if they're interested, they can make contact. So thank you so much for that. That's great. All right. We talked to our manufacturers. We're going to talk very briefly about diagnostics right now. We wanted to start to have the diagnostics conversation since that's the direction that people are starting to move. It's also in our DNA, as it were. Aaron and I were both part of a DNA diagnostics company that did very, very nicely. And we want to have the discussion of what's going on in the world of diagnostics. I know that we had a couple people who wanted to talk about diagnostics. So if you want to talk about diagnostics and your efforts there, please raise your hand. I'm going to go first to Vanessa Kelchner with Acadium.
Hey everybody, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you for organizing this webinar. Once again, it was very informative, so thanks. My name is Vanessa Kelchner, and I'm the Vice President of Operations at Acadium Life Sciences. We make buoyant microbubbles for use in biological separations, and we currently have kits on the market for cell separation. We are actually developing an RNA isolation kit. Specifically, what we're looking for are additional partners to help us out, mainly people that are working on diagnostics and also looking for QC assistance, as we're not a BSL2+ lab. So if there's anybody out there that's interested, please send me an email at vanessa@acadium.com, and I'll put my email address in the chat. And I'll also check out the list that I believe Ray had mentioned.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Vanessa. I'm next going to go to John. And John, I'm having a hard time pronouncing your last name. Maybe you can tell us how it works, John.
Hi, my name's John Gieschek. I am working with a distributor based in Hong Kong called ECM Medical to distribute rapid antibody COVID-19 tests. We're distributing them right now to Australia. We just got Australian TGA approval yesterday. That we also have CE mark. They have an acknowledgement letter from the FDA for EUA submission. So we're allowed to distribute in the US, and we're able to sell in labs and point of care places here can use it. It's very easy to use. Finger prick blood test that can be done in almost any setting. Staff don't need to be highly trained or specialized trained. Doesn't require a laboratory. So yeah, that's a little bit about what I'm doing. I'll send my information in the chat bubble.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate that. That's great. All right, what we're going to do next is we are going to open it up for general comments. One of the things that we heard from many of you afterwards was this is really phenomenal. This is really useful. We love the ability to connect, to quickly churn things up, and to get ideas out there. We also like hearing about what FDA's latest thinking is. And I think that's going to be a good resource. So going forward, we are going to have this call for as long as it's useful. There'll come a point where it's not useful anymore and we'll stop it, but we're going to have a check-in. It may be half an hour, maybe an hour. It probably won't be a full hour and a half. Every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, the page is up. You can register at intobeing.com/COVIDconnect. And we want to keep this conversation going to convene and have people talking together about these things. But here's the question we want to talk about in the last 5 minutes. Many people have said, this is great. It's good to have this information. We've connected to people that we wouldn't otherwise have been able to connect to, but what's next? What do we do next? And we're starting to see more resources come online. We're starting to see these Medtronic open sourcing something. We're seeing Ford, thank you Ford, partnering with Aaron, and we're seeing all these great things happen. What can we do to further? We heard today that the testing needs are large and that the ventilator needs are large. Is there something we can do to convene? I know that if we had a whole army of engineers and a floor, and the talents of many of us around the state, as well as many of the suppliers that have called into these, I'm sure that the Medtronic copycat could be made. What other ideas do you have? What can we as a community do to move the ball forward? What are the things that need to happen next, other than connecting, which we're going to keep doing for as long as it's useful? Raise your hand if you've got ideas about what you want to see happen. What are the things that need to happen? What's the idea? This is your chance to talk to the community and tell us what needs to happen next. How can we better partner together as a community? Raise your hand if you've got thoughts. And while we're waiting for those to come in, I'm going to go back to the team at Into Being and ask, are there any other questions that we missed that we could touch on that might have gotten dismissed in an initial screen, but we could answer here? And please keep the hands raising for your thoughts as you have them, as the staff is looking at the questions. Any other questions from our staff?
Gene, there was one question. Can you comment on the labeling for ventilator accessories? Labeling requirements reduced at this time, is their understanding? What types of claims should we be avoiding?
That's a great question, Rick. Let's open up that document again while we're doing that. And folks can look for raised hands if anyone's got a great idea that you want to share with the whole group. We're going to open up the ventilator EUA. The question was about labeling.
Yes, accessory labeling.
Accessory labeling specifically. So right here, one of the things is authorized ventilators. Is this showing for everyone, by the way? Check with the staff here.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Authorized ventilators, ventilator tubing connectors, and ventilator accessories listed in Appendix B must be accompanied by labeling developed by the sponsor that includes information specified in Appendix A. So that's where you're going to want to go. It's Appendix A of the ventilator EUA, which if you don't have access to, just let us know. In addition, the authorized products must be accompanied by the following information pertaining to the emergency use, which is also described in Appendix A. And that includes a fact sheet for healthcare providers and a fact sheet for patients. And last I checked, FDA had actually drafted a fact sheet for each of these uses and was making it available on their website. And so we thank them for doing that. But Appendix A would be your next destination, as well as those two fact sheets. We can scroll down here really quickly, where they talk about the standards and the things that you have to tell them about the ventilators, modes, specifications for the battery, alarms. These are all standard things for medical devices, but they're calling out the ones specifically that they're going to make an issue out of.
And Gene, those appendices are both linked on the Into Being /regulatory links page.
Great. Reprocessing and shelf life information is going to have to be thought about. Facility requirements, if they require gas inputs and things like that. Here's the description again of the fact sheets that are going to have to accompany them. And here are, I think the question was specific to accessories. So here's continuous ventilator splitters, adapters for multiplexing. And they are going to focus on wanting to see descriptions or discussion demonstrating the sponsor's assessment of the considerations of material properties, material strength, biocompatibility, leak tests, alarms, as well as compliance with these guidances. And then also appropriate labeling, providing instructions for use and cautionary statements. There's more labeling stuff down here. So I think the short answer to the questioner's question is all of that labeling stuff that you need to be thinking about is down here. That's generally going to come out of your design control process for something like this. And if you have any other questions about that, feel free to contact us. Are there any other questions there from, I've got one person online who wants to tell us about their thoughts, but before we go there, any other questions that we can answer really quick, team?
Yeah, another person asked if there were any standards related to splash shields, international standards.
To the face shields, that is a great question. Don't know the answer off the top of my head. We will get back to that questioner on that one. Great question. Good. We're going to go over, Nikki Kennedy has some thoughts for us. Nikki.
Hey, Jean, just want to make a quick comment. I know we're looking primarily at urgent devices, but I just want to bring up a thought. I don't have a solution for it right now. We've been switching over to a lot of video visits, which I think is probably going to play a bigger role as this all plays out. And what we lack as providers is a good way to conduct that physical exam remotely. So if anyone out there is looking to work on a very low cost, because if you're going to give it to the patient to keep, it can't be $300, ways of doing a stethoscope, being able to listen to lungs, be able to hear what a dialysis fistula sounds like, that would be a whole other avenue of innovation that would really make a difference and probably will have good longevity too. Just wanted to throw that out there.
That's great. Thank you for that, Nikki. Any other thoughts from our audience before we close today? We are going to we're going to close up here. We'll be back on Friday at 2. It'll be a much shorter call-in. We're going to give you any updates from FDA. We're going to have a chance to hear from folks with any new information and any other new things that the community wants to bring forward. We will have a chance to do that this Friday at 2, as well as subsequent Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. If there are no other comments or thoughts, I want to just thank everybody for your participation. From all the folks who helped us to convene this in the first place, to all of the participants. We've got some pretty major companies on here listening and picking up data and information. I hope that they will reach out, whether through us or to you individually, to find out more about how we can all collaborate together. And in the meantime, if you have any other thoughts, questions, comments, or if we can help you in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you for joining us today. And with that, we're going to close, and the webinar will be distributed as the one Friday was to all the registrants. Thanks again. Have a great day.